Great.
Thank you. See, I just wanted to make sure that anyone who was coming in remotely had plenty of time to find some note cards and or post-it notes. So now that you guys are all ready, thanks again for joining us. I'm Julie Bezzerides. I teach Spanish in the Division of Humanities, and
I'm Liz Martin, and I teach biology.
And you've joined us today for our session called Make It Modular, Incorporating Variety into Your Instructional Techniques. And our goals today are to learn a technique called modular teaching. And we're going to use that technique to make sure that we're having a good level of variety in each lesson and throughout the course of the semester, with the main goal of engaging our students as best we can and helping them to avoid distractions. Which brings us to why we even put this session together. Liz and I were both part of the fall 2021 CTL faculty book group, in which we read this book that there's a picture up on the screen, and here's the book. See, it's proof we own it. The book is Distracted: Why Students Can't Focus and What You Can Do About It. And I think Marcy was also part of the group. Marlo read it. Anybody else? Was anybody else? Rachel was in the group. Yes. It was actually quite large. There were a good number of people. It was maybe the biggest one that I've been a member of. And I do highly recommend the book. So if you're interested in teaching and you're interested particularly in student focus and engagement, I would say this is one of the better books I've read on the topic. So I do recommend it. The book is in 3 major sections. The first section talks about a history of distraction, and it points out that distraction is not new. So obviously from the beginning of time, people have been distracted by things. So you can think of Socrates asking his pupils questions, and probably a beautiful handmaiden walks by going to the well, and all the pupils look, they get distracted. So distraction is not new, but we do have a new level of distraction with all of our electronic devices, which brings him to the second part of the book, which talks about how to deal with electronics in the classroom and different technology. But what I loved most about the book was the third part of the book, where he started talking about structured attention and focus in the classroom. And he gave a lot of great examples of how we can help our students focus and to avoid the pitfalls of various distractions that are inevitably out there. Now, if anybody's been in education very long, you know that things come around, right? So something becomes popular. Apparently, this idea of modular teaching is not new. It just used to be known as pattern teaching. So if you know or have heard of pattern teaching, that has been around for a while too. Well, before we get into talking about the modular teaching and testing it out, let's talk about a bit about student attention. Now, James Lang, the author of Distracted, does establish quite a case for how our students are indeed distracted and why we want to address that in the classroom. And one of the things he points out is that each individual student has a level of attention that waxes and wanes through any course period. So, and it's not the same for every student. One student may start out with very high attention, get distracted, their attention peaks again, while the other student may have come to class distracted, but then something catches their attention. So we have these waves of attention throughout any class period. And the book says that an environmental psychologist named Stephen Kaplan has done a fair amount of research and writing on attention. He does point out that even though the wave of attention waxing and waning happens throughout the class, there's an additional effect in which our direct attention is susceptible to fatigue. So it's kind of like there are waxes and wanes, but over the course of any class period, eventually the attention is going to degrade over time, such that all students are going to end the class period with a lower level of attention than they started. So the author then reacts to this and he says, that shows us that we really must feature regular change and variety in any class presentation or class session. And so he makes a really strong case for why we need variety. And I liked one particular study that he referenced out of St. Louis University in 2007 that showed that student attention perks up during lecture segments following an active learning experience. So I think we all know that students get more engaged in the classroom when we engage them in some active learning experience in which they're talking, they're moving, they're writing, they're doing something actively. But his research showed in numerous studies that those active learning experiences also help students pay more attention to lecture segments after doing the active learning. So it helped them with the lecture portion of every class that inevitably we have to lecture some. Here I am lecturing some, right? People have to listen for a little while. So then we need to get them doing something that's a change, which brings us to our changing instructional pedagogies and our symbol of the day, good old Delta. So whenever we're inspired to have some sort of change, go ahead and do it. Make yourself a Delta. We're dedicated today to the symbol of change throughout any given presentation, class, and overall course. So what we want to focus on is the idea that we want to remember as instructors and educators that we can always present concepts in alternate formats. So we want to get creative. Then we want to make deliberate attempts to renew attention in any given session. So we're going to plan deliberately. My students are going to start losing their focus about now. Okay, at that point in the lecture, I need to deliberately plan some sort of alternate activity to refocus their attention. And then we want to help our students engage using that energy in lecture formats after that. Okay, I should have had you guys all stretch before we had any lecture. Yes. Now, when we think about change in the classroom, it can be small changes, like maybe this slide just caught your attention because it has a different background and a different font. So any level of variety and change can help maintain and renew attention. Now, do we all want to do our little Delta again? Yeah, Delta. So there we are doing change. But when we talked about this in the book group, people were concerned that sometimes we foster structure in the classroom for a reason, that we want to have a structured, predictable classroom so that students feel comfortable. And we don't want to necessarily have to get all wild about everything. So James Lang in the book suggests that we don't have to get insane about our level of circus act, right? That every classroom doesn't have to be moving randomly and wildly from activity to activity. He suggests in any 1 50-minute or 75-minute session that you maybe have 2 to 3 changes of pace. You know, something that you can plan that there will be 1 or 2 transitions over your 50 to 75 minutes. So we don't have to get this crazy. Should I have gone crazier? Maybe. I could have gone crazier. No, see the rainbow coloring? That's wild, people. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the part where we're thinking of teaching as modular. So if we look at what we do in the classroom and we treat each type of pedagogical activity as a module, as a cognitive activity, then that's what we mean by making it modular. So for example, I could choose lecture as one module, one type of pedagogical activity. And then I could choose pairing and sharing as another type of module or type of pedagogical activity. And then I have an activity in my classes that I like for vocabulary where we play a fly swatter game. So then I could choose fly swatter game as another type of module. So we're just constructing our class periods by combining these common activities that we enjoy doing with our students and that we find effective in our classrooms. So we're just trying to build a lesson plan saying, I'm going to do introductory activity, it'll be a demonstration, then 15 minutes of lecture, then fly swatter activity to really get them going, and then pair and share to talk about the fly swatter activity or some such thing. So what James Lang in his book suggests is that this is both going to support attention and learning, but also it's going to help us as educators to be aware of our strategies and routines. So I can see if I'm using this card system, I can see that I grab the lecture card every single day. And maybe a few times a week, I grab the pair and share card and I put it in my lecture. And as much as I love fly swatter activity, it's been sitting there all semester and we've never made it to fly swatter activity. And so it brings this awareness to which patterns we are falling into as instructors. So the main lesson of the modular teaching is stop talking and ask the students to do something. So in other words, shift from some sort of passive activity to an active activity, which is what I really should do now, is stop talking and ask us to do something. So what we're going to do for the rest of the session is brainstorm our teaching modules, and we can do that individually and together a little bit. We're going to write our modules on either index cards or post-it notes with one module per card. So lecture on one, pair and share on another, all the types of things that you like to do in your courses. And then I think we decided we were going to consider a recent class. So think of a recent class you taught, maybe even a class today, because it's a little easier to reflect the first time on something you have done and maybe decide how we should have structured it. Asking yourself with the main goal in mind, what do you want the students to accomplish? So thinking of a class today, do we want the students to have accomplished this? Did they accomplish that? Are there other ways we could have helped them to accomplish it with more engagement? And then we're going to build some class periods. And from this point, Ms. Liz Martin will help us go through the process. Thanks for your attention. I guess I should ask before I totally retire. And I get to practice the activity too, because I would like to use it myself. Do any questions arise thus far, or shall we go to the moduling? That's not a verb, by the way, moduling. No.
Make it a verb.
Shall we modulate?
Yes.
Okay, I turn you over to Liz Martin.
All right, so what we're gonna do for the large chunk of this time from now on is actually put into action one of the activities that was described in the book. Julie just gave you an overview of it, but yeah, so I guess just to start in on it, with your postcard or not postcards, post-it notes or note cards, just take some time to think about what you tend to do in the classroom. Like, what are your go-to type activities?
Yeah,
And on
another
each
level.
card, just write each of those down. And I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to do that, and then we can share what we've been writing as well. Did you notice that there was something in the chat?
I did not notice anything in the chat.
Oh, okay, it's.
I can pull it up over here so that-
It was not a question to answer. So.
Did I do that?
I was gonna say, you're missing the nasal sound of the voice.
Did I do that?
Flashback from the 90s.
Maybe even 80s.
Could have been earlier.
I can't remember if it was late 80s or early 90s. No, yeah, probably late 80s.
I think I was kind of beyond watching sitcoms in the 90s. So.
Yeah, right.
Put it in
I
the
used to
80s.
plan my week around it.
Yeah, but 90s would have been like Friends, so I think it would have been late, or it would have been late 80s probably,
Mhm.
or mid to late 80s.
Now, it seems like everyone at a distance is busy writing modules. Yeah, anybody have questions? You're okay? I already see my first problem. I'm gonna have a lot of
Oh,
modules.
mhm.
Is that a problem?
I don't know.
What? Can we compete?
Perhaps I should be doing this. All right, so everyone in the room still seems to be writing away. Are you folks online still busy writing?
I have so
We have
many
at
more
least
still.
one.
So many more to write.
Right, so as you guys are still writing, I'm just gonna say a few things. So as you're collecting your pile of cards and activities, some things to think about are which ones are more of your passive type activities, which ones are your more active activities that really are engaging the students. Also, which ones are like cognitively more challenging for students, or the ones that, you know, are really challenging them versus ones that are, you know, easier, you know, fun and don't require as much brain power from them. Right, and do we want to share some of these? Do you guys want to hear what other people are writing down? Okay, I was thinking about doing that if there was anybody that was struggling to come up with activities, but you guys are not. So how about, should we start with the folks in the room want to share like one or two things that you're putting down on your cards? You want to start, Marlo?
Sure. I have everyone has a voice where I go around the room and everyone says one thing. And in class writing.
Okay.
Let's see, I have a synthesis, which is in organic chemistry. They get to come up with their own syntheses of complex molecules, which is a lot of fun. And which reminds me of things that I just forgot to write down. And then I guess the one I tried starting last year, and I'm still doing it, was Eric Martin's suggestion of having some meditation time at the beginning of class. And so I have them visualize molecules, and it's kind of spectacular.
Cool. Yeah.
Would you like to share?
Sure, I do, well, it's kind of class specific, but I will, for some speech and debate classes, I will do impromptus or what we call SPAR debates or spontaneous debates. So it's on like silly topics like Coke versus Pepsi or cats versus dogs sort of thing for debates. One of my go-tos is always to show a video example for analysis or discussion. And I also like to sort of do brainstorming on the board where I ask them for synonyms for certain things or just writing as many things as we can on the board.
Okay. Julie, what's one of your cards over there?
I also enjoy having them go to the board as a way to get them out of their chair. And also often I'll give each one a verb to conjugate on the board in a certain verb tense, or I'll say, okay, you did let activity or questions 1 through 10 as homework. You get to write up the answer to 1, you 2, you 3, 4. And so then they'll go to the board and write them up, and then we'll talk about the answers together. So.
Okay. How about folks online? Would you like to share at least one thing you have on your cards?
I'll go. This is Ben.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone has heard of these interactive Kahoot quizzes, but they're basically online, but they allow students to like take a quiz publicly from their phone. So I do that for, basically I like to prompt periodically throughout the lecture. So if we learn a couple of concepts, then you can take a quiz on the concepts to see, do you actually understand these concepts before we can move on. And another one would be, I got this idea from grad school, but the clearest idea or the muddiest point. So they essentially say what idea really stood out to them from the reading, and then also what's the point that they just can't wrap their heads around.
Exactly.
And that's it.
Thank you. Someone else? I hate like directly calling on people, so I'll let you opt to unmute yourselves and share.
I can share one of mine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Usually I'm working with students that are learning a second language. So I like to start the class with a review of the concept that we were previously practicing. So it starts out a little bit more like an individual activity, and then we come together and kind of like what was mentioned earlier, have them come up to the board and respond to part of the review, and just kind of reinforce that learning. And then I also like to do kind of like interview like activities where they're talking to their peers, asking them questions, practicing the language, really getting up and moving and talking to each other.
All right, thanks. Do you have anything to add, Amy or Mercedes?
Like on a really fun day, we'll try some sort of creation technique where, you know, students are creating their own sort of original something or other. And that could get them even like drawing and stuff in a classroom. And then probably something more, probably on the boring side would be to like watch a video, but to think about some questions as they're watching it, because then afterwards we'll reflect on it, whether it's either in individual writing like a journal or in a whole group discussion.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice pairing of the active and passive activities. So, yeah. Mercedes?
Yeah, of course. So one of the challenges that I've faced is that I'm teaching an online class, so it's a little harder to make sure that, you know, people are actively engaged. But some of the things that I've tried to do so far is when I post my lecture, which is just a video, or sorry, a voice over PowerPoint, I try to stop and do like clicker type questions periodically through the lecture. Of course, people can't actually, you know, submit their response, but I'll post a question and have, you know, multiple choice type answers and have students kind of like visualize what they would pick. And another thing I've been doing is after I go over some major points in a section, I have students do what I call a 2-minute paper. So I'll just pause the lecture for 2 minutes and have students write down as many things as they can think of about the section that we just covered.
Great, nice. Okay, so it sounds like we all have plenty of tools in our toolboxes. So what we're gonna do now is figure out how to progress the slide. Okay, we're gonna build a class. So it may be easiest to think about the class that you have most recently taught, because it's fresh on your mind, and think about what you wanted, what your objectives were for that class, and how you built that class, or maybe how you should have built that class if you're now thinking about a different approach. So some rules of thumb that we learned about from the book: it only takes 3 or 4 modules to build a 50-minute class period. Maybe add one more in if you're in the hour and 15-minute slot. So you're really going to have to just pick from those piles on your table in front of you right now. No modules should be more than about 20 minutes. So again, this is with keeping attention in mind, because it's going to be waning after 20 minutes, and that's going to be the time to switch things up and swap to another module. And to put in a mix of those active and passive formats and alternate them, have something active followed by something passive and so on. So I'm going to let you all arrange your cards.
As I have my cards, I'm thinking maybe if I labeled them, on a 5-star system.
Like,
Five stars being the most active, 1 star being the most passive, or vice versa. And then, I don't know, or at least you can label them A for active, P for passive to help set.
You could have them color coded here.
I want a
Yeah.
color code, yeah. Yeah.
That messed up my system.
So I can say I've been trying to do this semester. I'm not successful in planning all classes this way, but I've at least done some. And I was way more general on my cards than you all are being. Like they might say something general like game or lecture, board work. So yeah, I didn't divide them all out quite so specifically.
You guys can borrow the 5-star system idea.
I
don't have time for a 5-star system.
Well, and that's a good point. This is supposed to save time too.
Yeah, it is billed as an efficiency technique.
So I'm kind of gauging time for this off of what I'm seeing in the room, and people are still putting their class periods together.
I think I need a couple like short lecture cards in order to do this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my go-to thing.
Yeah.
In the sciences, I feel like there's a lot of lecture, so.
Or
Even
even
just like put it at the center.
dividing the types of lecture out too, like lecture problem solving, lecture content, lecture, I don't know, history and
Restart the
culture.
lecture versus
I see where you're going.
Sometimes I can surpass or I can breeze through lecture if I'll do a handout and give them a handout where I've already got the notes there.
Mhm.
And so sometimes if I think about it, I can give them a handout, I can give them a handout and I can just pull out key concepts and say, everything's here.
Yeah.
Here's your outline. And then I can not do as much lecture.
So that will be your lecture with handout card.
Yeah.
Right, because that is variety from lecture where they write the notes,
Mhm.
lecture with a PowerPoint handout or a fill in the blank handout.
Mhm.
Well, I forgot about this, that in my senior research class, because I'm not teaching it this year, but I have them do, they do the presentation on the content.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Which is very different and
Yeah.
engaging in different ways, right?
Right. So I think this points to there's no one way to put together your class, which will lead right to this next slide. So looking at your class, and I'm just going to let you assess your own cards on your table. Are there things that you could do differently that could increase the student attention during the class period? For example, could you rearrange some of those cards so that perhaps you're throwing your most, fun, exciting, everyone's up out of their chair activity, at a point in the class where you think students will be the most tired? And are you sandwiching those challenging modules or passive modules in between your active modules? So could you take a different approach to your class and perhaps keep their attention more? I'm just curious, are you guys seeing anything in your cards?
Well, I think it is kind of interesting having only one lecture card.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
now I don't want to make another lecture card. And I just want to figure out I'm just going to put the lecture right there. And that's the only time I get to use it. And now I'm done. I can't use the lecture anymore, which actually I think could challenge me. Because at first I thought I would make 3 lecture cards and then I would have, short little 5-minute. And I'm just you know what, maybe not. Maybe I only get one.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I think
Oh, go ahead.
the other thing that I'm thinking about is I have a tendency to sort of outline the chapter for my lecture, right? And go in the order of the chapter. But I think that there's also something to going in reverse or focusing on one concept or like focusing on like saying, hey, I don't have to cover this today. Let's just focus on this part and play with it, you know?
Right. Those of you on Zoom, any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I like Marcy's idea of essentially like seeing or trying to create like a story, whether that's, you know, Julie mentioned having your layout kind of solve a problem. So you introduce a problem at the beginning of class and say, how are we going to answer this? Or how have other people tried to answer it? And you kind of leave them uneasy through the middle or trying to figure out the problem. And then by the end, you kind of all come together and saying, here are different ways that they've solved it. And then hopefully leaving it for there are still problems to solve in this area somehow.
Yeah. And along the way, you're taking them on this journey with some passive thinking activities, some active activities. Yep.
I don't know who said this. I think it was Dawn about having a handout where they, fill in the blanks or, fill out a section. But I really like that idea, especially for maybe an online class. It kind of allows more of an activity than it does just listening to a lecture. So thank you to whoever said that.
Right.
I do handout with lectures sometimes, but not necessarily, but I like to fill in the blanks also.
Yeah.
But where I'll put the notes and sometimes I'll cover key concepts out of it, and it allows me to get through certain parts of, I can run through lecture more quickly if I only focus on certain things rather than getting bogged down on doing a big long PowerPoint. But if I give them the handout, I'm like, okay, we're only going to talk about these concepts today. But I hadn't thought about doing fill in the blanks into the handout. That's a really cool idea. The thing that I do with some of the online classes too, instead of doing what I like for online, instead of doing a traditional discussion, like in kind of that game realm of format is, and I just did this week with one of my online classes, is I have them do a challenge. So for my persuasion class, I'll have them do an advertising challenge where they have to come up with branding stuff. And during when we get to the advertising chapter where they create the logo, if you've ever played the logo game on on your phone or something, something like that, where they have to come up with challenges for their other classmates. And so with the class that I'm doing this week, I was doing a representation challenge where they had to come up with 5 questions for their classmates. So they create challenge questions and then people it's a guessing game sort of thing.
Right.
And I like that as an alternative to a regular discussion because it breaks up the discussion.
Right. I also teach online, and my online classes are all asynchronous. They've been online since before the days of COVID. And I have the pre-recorded lecture, PowerPoints with the voiceover as well. And my rule of thumb is no one lecture can be more than 10 minutes long. And I intersperse them just in the order that I present them on Canvas with little test yourself quizzes, no points, just here. See how you're doing as you're progressing along.
So some good variety.
Yeah, but it's hard when it's online and you're not there with them and you never have met them.
And you don't know if they're taking advantage of the variety that you're presenting,
True.
Right?
You have no idea. Yeah. Well, some know.
Yeah.
In a good way is what I meant. So those really good students who find that you've made a mistake in your answer key.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges with the online and bringing variety, right? But one thing that, you can't require them to be there at that time. That's why they're taking an asynchronous class. But one of my colleagues had a great idea where you let them schedule a 10, 15 minute conversation. And this could be literally once a semester, but just to say, hey, I'm a talking human, and that could be like an assignment. Like we're going to have a discussion about this reading or whatever's coming up that week, but you can have them schedule a time in which they're available. And of course, during your work hours, but that's a great way to kind of bridge that gap too and add some variety.
Yeah, I did something
Good
like that a semester or two ago when I ended up teaching a class that I never thought I'd teach online. And as part of one of the assignments, I said that it was like just a standard, like you get 50 points for doing it, or you get so many points for doing it, is set up an appointment with me and set up a Zoom appointment. We did a Zoom appointment meeting in the middle of the semester, and that was one of their assignments, and they would get the points for it. And it was like, what can I do to help you? Like it was leading up to another assignment. And it was kind of amazing. Like it was a lot of like, I mean, it was a half-hour scheduling appointment with 20 students, but at the same time, I actually got to know my students that and put names with faces for an online class that was kind of like, I loved doing it.
Mhm.
Like, and it was, I got a lot out of it for that particular class. I don't know that I would necessarily do it with some of the bigger online classes that I have. But it was really rewarding.
Cool. Okay, I have a nuts and bolts question. So I did my lesson that I just did for my most recent class this afternoon. And so we went group review, individual worksheet. We reported our answers to the worksheet on the Elmo. Then we did another individual worksheet. We reported our answers on the board. And then we had some personal questions. One, does that seem like too many transitions? Or is reporting the answers really the same activity? That's the same activity?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily the same activity, but it's the same material, so.
So it's not a huge transition. But then already I had to make 2 individual worksheet cards. And then I'm thinking, what if I were planning out a week? You'd have to make multiple lecture cards. You'd have to make multiple worksheet cards. I don't know.
So you're transitioning.
Okay.
You're prompting. So scaling this up to the next level, so you can plan a class and what you're going to do for an individual day, but then a good idea is to then think about what you're going to do for the week. And again, you want to have it varied throughout the course of the week. And so perhaps if you are finding yourself using the same card over and over and over again, it's time to throw one of those other cards into the mix so that you are giving students some variety. That being said, don't make it too wild and crazy like Julie's slide with the rainbow colored wild. And some of the advice that Lang offers in his book is early in the semester, it is really good to have that pattern in there and to be a little bit repetitive so that students are getting used to what you do in the classroom and what they can expect. But then once that pattern is established, you can start throwing in some of those different activities because they'll be comfortable in the classroom at that point in time. And perhaps you've noticed that your fly swatter hasn't been used all semester long and it's time to throw it in.
It's true. I haven't
say
fly
something
swatter.
about
Yes.
that too?
Yes.
So I have Chem 105, which is a first year class. This Chem 105, Julie has said it. So it's 50 students, and they're all, they're first year students, and it's general education chemistry, and they're always nervous about taking the class. And so, we do, I didn't put it on my cards. We do like 15 minutes once a week on study tips and, like this is how the classes work. Yep, you got to add that card. You
Yep.
forgot it, didn't you?
Uh-huh,
And so,
I did.
but here's the thing. On Monday, we talked about distraction because of that book. And we talked about what the rules for, like why I say you can't use the computers except for what we're doing in the class. And then I talked about how I set up the class to have different activities so that they don't get distracted and that they can do the same thing at home when they're studying and do different types of activities at home for studying, and then gave them some study suggestions for different studying techniques that they could vary. And so I feel like maybe that, like, I don't like to pat myself on the back again, but that was actually a good idea. Like,
That was, yes. And
so-
I made 2 cards out of it.
Yeah, me too, actually. I need to add some parts here. Yeah, and they seem to be responding really well to that time, but I think also doing stuff like this, which sometimes feels a little uncomfortable, like I actually think explaining why we're doing it can help students feel more comfortable with it.
One of my cards, so you had me write a study tip card, so to actually spend a little time periodically to go over study techniques. But then my other one was, I really liked your idea of the explicit teaching moment where you explain why you're doing what you're doing. And that's a big, I think, refocusing activity too, because I think the students would really, jolt out of whatever content you're covering and say, oh, something different is happening here.
Yeah, it's like the insider info.
Yes,
Yeah.
like why
Yeah.
are we doing this? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and as they get more familiar with it, you can ask them, why are we doing this? And then they feel empowered when they know.
then they know. Yeah, what are we gonna call that? Student recognizes explicit teaching techniques.
Metacognition moments.
Yes.
Yeah, metacognition moment.
Oh, I like it. That's okay.
For sure.
I also like the inclusion of, and I've been trying to be a bit more intentional about doing this, but like I would call it my agenda card, but like the agenda objectives for the day, because I feel like it sets sort of the expectations and also the potential pacing, because I think it's helpful as a student to know, or even, attending a conference or something, like this could potentially last this long, or this might take a little bit longer, chunk of time, rather than the idea of, okay, this person is going to lecture for the whole hour and 15 minutes, and this is going to be really boring. You can kind of, I think, help with that cognitive load a bit to sort of ease their worry, panic, and or boredom. So another thing too, I really like this exercise because I had on one of my cards student models, and that has mostly been a passive thing. And I take the time to find what I think are good models for students to follow. And yet I have no real accountability for if they actually accessed these. And so that's really not a good use of my time if I don't really know that. So I was thinking about how I could make this passive sort of activity that I am assuming they're doing on their own and should probably not do that, something that we could carve out just 5 minutes. Okay, this table, take these 2 paragraphs, this table, take these 2 paragraphs. What is the writer doing well? What do you see being applied that we just talked about, or something like that? So actually transforming it into something more active.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
On your first point, Amy, it's like you've read the book. So because he did make the point that it is really good to give the students, I mean, he made it analogous to a program for the class. And he, told the story about being at like the orchestra one night, and it was a section where he just wasn't into the music, and it just seemed to be going on and on and on. And he could look at his program and be like, okay, this piece is only 20 minutes long. I can do this. I can sit through this. Something better is coming. So yes.
One mini programming thing that I like to do is when I show a video, I tell the students how long it is before I start it, so that they know that it's 90 seconds and they just have to focus and it's done. Or if it's 13 minutes, they can sit back and just watch, or yeah.
I do that too.
Yeah.
And usually this video is only 4 minutes long. You guys can do this.
Well, and similarly, if I'm doing lecture then following the chapter outline, like I'll put section headers in between my PowerPoints
Mhm.
so they can follow along like with the chapter if they want, but they also know that helps them guide like where we are in the chapter also.
Yeah. And they can say a new header's coming, we're gonna shift topics. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back to Rachel's point too about kind of like being sort of like that sort of insider information or explicitly talking about teaching. Sometimes I'll tell my students, I'm showing this video because I actually think they explain it better than I ever could. Or the examples that they use are, I think, really great. Or they really go into a lot of depth or detail that, you know, I would not be able to do or something like that. So kind of almost justifying showing it. So I don't know.
I think that's a great idea. It points out what to watch for, you know, what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I'll tell students why I picked a certain video. I picked this because it does this really well, so that they know what to watch for. All right. And then another point that I just want to reiterate here is, or I think I've said it before, this is supposed to save time in course preparation. That was a big point that was also made in the book. And I don't know, I guess I'm kind of waiting to see if it does for me or not. But the example he gave was a new teacher. I don't know if it was a first year teacher or not, but someone who was relatively new to teaching, who was spending so much time just over preparing for class because you're really nervous about having extra time. And so you overfill. And just to take a step back and remember that you only need for an hour, you know, 3 or 4 main things, and it does fill the time. And if you can, you know, maybe even just put your note cards in order for a day and say, you know, I want to have board work, I want to have a game, I want to have a lecture, maybe you have a quiz in there. And then you can, you know, develop things for.
I didn't do any assessments.
Oh, yeah, well. Assign, like, I guess that's explicit teaching moments when you're like spending time explaining how to do assignments.
Your assignments,
Is
yeah.
that explicit teaching moments or is that something else?
I
know,
I don't know how. I think it would take up an attempt to do this for a couple of weeks before you knew how detailed to get with your cards. So I wrote paired worksheet, small group worksheet, and large group worksheet, right? So do I need to clarify, are those different activities? Is that a different enough experience for the students that it merits its own, or is it just all a worksheet? You know,
Right.
Well, I mean, you can do small group discussion and large group, like you can do a
Yeah.
group discussion where
So
the whole
maybe we
class is in
can-
a circle versus a small group discussion where you break them up into 5 different groups too.
Well, maybe you
So
need modifiers then.
Yeah.
So like you have a separate pile of
Right.
modifiers versus the activity.
Yeah.
2-star worksheet, 3-star worksheet.
10-point quiz, 1 question quiz.
Small group, large group. Yeah.
But also these are
Challenging,
for you.
challenging.
Well, and I say this thinking about my approach this semester, and I have on my wall that I'm staring at from my desk, I only have like 8 or 10 sticky notes up there, which are the ones that I kind of move around and I put in order, thinking about how I'm going to plan a class. And I just have to know what they mean. It could just say worksheet. And I know that it's going to be a worksheet, and then maybe it's a, you know, an individual worksheet one day and a group worksheet another day. And that might make it more manageable because you're going to need space to put all these cards. Julie has like 50 cards over there.
I
Julie wins.
I definitely, if I'm gonna do this, I think I need like to cut each note card into 6, so, you know, so they're much smaller.
It's not a bingo game.
No, although I do have bingo as an activity right here. Liz, do you want to share what you said about the Post-it notes falling?
Oh,
that as
Oh,
like
true,
a
true,
very
yes.
practical application.
yeah, so I did put mine on Post-it notes because I wanted them up on something and to be able to move them around. And you can tell what activities you may overuse because those sticky notes lose their stickiness right away. And then the things that you don't ever do, because at the end of the semester, it's probably still going to be up on my wall because I thought I might do it, but it just never made it into the course.
Well, and that's a good teaching. So we have the anecdotes teaching moments, right? Like, do you have anecdotes on there? And what if they're like complete, like the random anecdote that goes off into like left field versus the anecdote that actually, like yours did, actually gives you some information about how to do the activity.
Right. But then you also, I mean, stick with what you're comfortable with and what works for you too. I mean, don't
And some
try to do
activities
something
just
that
don't work
doesn't.
for some classes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And the author of Distracted was very good about that throughout the whole book. He said, if it's just not your personality, it's just not your personality, you know, like, and I really appreciated that he said, as much as an idea that somebody proposes might sound good to you and sound like something that you should try in your classroom, if you're not comfortable with that activity as an individual, then he said, just don't do it. You know, there's no reason that you have to feel like singing should be part of your curriculum, or, you know, or, you know, or there's no reason.
Entertaining.
Yeah. If you don't like playing music videos at the start of class, don't worry about it. Yeah. And so.
But I want to be cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting to the end of the hour, so I was just going to show you what else we had up here for things to think about and take home with you. I never pushed the right thing here. So thinking about what part of this process you find really helpful. If you've done something like this in the past, how did it go and can you improve on it, or maybe take things from that moving forward? And does it really seem like it will be a time-saving technique? Because I feel like we're all after that, saving a little bit of time in our prep. And we have up here references if you guys want to seek out more information. And I might just, well, are these posted?
I can.
Or, okay, we could. We had a list here of brainstorming of different activities. We didn't need to show it because everyone here came up with more than that's here, but just some other ideas if you want some other ideas of things to throw into your classroom. All right.
Well, and that could be really useful for if we have to incorporate these in our job descriptions. So just making a note.
For today's meeting.
Yeah.
We'll just turn in our cards with our
Are you supposed to put these in your?
I did these things. It was just suggested. So this is neither here nor there, but we had a division meeting today, and we have a committee that specifically works on using the job descriptions to help the chair with the paperwork associated with annual evaluation. And some people just write the courses that they teach in the teaching section, while other people have a bit of a narrative about, like, this is the second time I've taught this course, I'm revising these things, blah, 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 right? Yes, and it was suggested to those who do not have a bit of a narrative that would be helpful to the committee that helps.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always just listed the classes.
I want to say a couple years ago, they told us to start putting descriptions under the classes.
Mary did.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like she did mention that.
Like we were originally just writing the classes, and then I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, we were told it would be helpful to add some descriptions, I think.
So it's excellent to do that, because as near as I can tell, what other people who don't teach think that we do is lecture, and that's it. And so actually being able to say, no, this requires more than just lecturing, I think is anytime you can say what's happening in the classroom, I think you're doing really well to do so.
I think it is a place where you can tell the chair, I do these things, you know? Yeah. Yeah. So that came up at the division meeting as a suggestion though. And then for some people who just list the classes, they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I want to just say thank you to everyone's ideas because I have walked away with a stack of, I don't know, 14 cards that, you know, I don't know, Ben, I've thought about using a Kahoot for I don't know how long, and I've never actually done it. So now I have a card to remind me to actually do a Kahoot. And I liked Marcy's idea of brainstorming on the board.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't do enough in-class writing. Everyone has a voice, you know? So I really appreciate all of the ideas that I have now for some more active and passive activities, but largely active activities.
But remember, you can only fit so much in the class.
Right.
Well, I think there's a nice
Right.
reminder that you don't have to do it in a specific order either.
Right.
Like that you can mix the order up. Like a lot of times I would always used to put a quiz at the beginning of class to see if they did the reading, but then I realized, oh, maybe I can just do a 1 or 2 question quiz at the end of class to see if they've been paying attention.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
things like that, like just mixing up the order in which you do things matters too.
And that really triggers that engagement piece for the students. They notice, oh, something is different, you know, and he did talk about that in the chapter. I'm glad you brought that up. He talked about even something as small as just rearranging the order of your typical classroom activities can be very engaging. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Liz and Julie. I love also this idea of kind of taking the book club one step further, you know, and doing a workshop or activity that builds on that work that was done.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Enjoy organizing your note cards. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.